The franchise involving the big turtle has always been second or even third to most kaiju fans, typically falling behind Godzilla and Ultraman. Likely odds that if you've ever met a Gamera fan, they're probably also big fans of Godzilla or Ultraman. But today I want to give Gamera his flowers. I've done a Godzilla marathon with my friends every year for like the past 3 years, and I just didn't really feel like doing that this year. So me and my friend, GojiBoy75, decided that, hey, Gamera is a pretty short film series compared to Godzilla, we can knock that out pretty quick. And so we did. I had seen a couple Gamera movies growing up, but never bothered to watch the entire franchise, so today I'll be ranking every Gamera film from worst to best. This will essentially act as both a ranking video and as a soft review for every film in the franchise, so you actually get some in-depth thoughts on my opinions on these movies. Obviously this is my opinion, so it's more like a least favorite to favorite, but worst to best has a better ring to it, and I'm sure you would have rather clicked on this video if it was more objective. I'll put it in a tier list format at the end of the video for you tier list freaks, but let's start at number 12 with the worst movie. Surprisingly, it is not Gamera Super Monster here. At dead last, I have Gamera vs. Zigra. The reason I have this dead last is because I think it does the malicious alien plot the worst. It's the last one of the Showa era before Gamera Super Monster, and it's just by far the least convincing. It might have something to do with me and my friends watching these movies all consecutively, relatively close to each other, but still, this movie is just a drag. The kids are just sort of silly in a not charming way. The stock footage is also not helping, but this movie has its moments, and I mean moments, and that really disappointed me because I really love Zigra's design. It's probably my favorite of the Showa Gamera Rogues Gallery. It's just a really cool design. But unfortunately, he's a part of probably the worst Gamera movie, in my opinion. The main couple of kids and the silly plot involving Zigra's mind control is just not fun to me. Gamera does roast the out of Zigra at the end though, and I thought that was kind of cool. They kind of go overboard on it, to be honest. Gamera vs. Virus is the first installment of what I'll call the Japanese and White Boy trilogy. Because for some reason, Virus, Squiron, and Jiger have this tendency to have a dynamic duo between a white kid and a Japanese boy. And I don't really know why they do that, but it's just the way it was. They all follow the exact same dynamic, and I thought it was funny. And this is honestly super similar to Zigra in terms of quality, near interchangeable for me. Nearly every movie in the Showa era uses at least a bit of stock footage, but this one just does it the least convincingly. They just lazily have aliens reach into the memories of these children who they catch and bring aboard their spaceship, yet neither of these kids were in the previous movies, so it doesn't really make sense that they know anything about the events of Gamera vs. Barugon or Gamera vs. Gauss. It's just not convincing at all. And Virus is probably the worst monster in the entire franchise. He's just so bland. So there really isn't anything to redeem this movie, in my opinion. It is the first alien invader plot of the franchise, and it actually does a decent job of making the aliens somewhat creepy, even if they are just sort of like human silhouettes sometimes. Like, I mean, does this not just sort of make you slightly uneasy? These guys are kind of freaky. I don't really like them that much. But it all becomes an illusion when they do this really silly thing when they like jump into the hallway and they like literally float and they like jump like this. It's like really funny. I will say that the dynamic between the kids in this movie are like is fun and lively. It's enjoyable, but with them being little pranksters and all, and other than that, this movie just drags out its runtime with stock footage and is just overall a slog with the alien subplot just not being engaging enough to be really worth watching. One positive is that I think the infamous Gamera song debuted in this movie though, so that's cool. Now, here is what people would cite as the worst Gamera movie, mainly due to the actual technical deficiencies of this movie, but overall, I don't think it's all bad. I actually somewhat enjoy the cast of this movie, and that's really all that carries it for me. But seriously, that is enough to lay claim to it being tolerable, which the other two behind this one just don't do for me. They're just sort of complete slogs to sit through, while this one at least is semi-enjoyable at times. I don't know, I find it kind of funny sometimes. In a sort of so bad it's good way, but as I mentioned, the main cast is actually kind of cute. I like it when Keiichi sings his little Gamera march song and sings it on the piano. I don't really have like an excuse for why this one isn't last, other than I managed to enjoy myself during this one just a little more. Alright, we've arrived at the first movie in the Gamera series, and although it's the pioneer, I wouldn't say that it...
What the f*** is that? That's not Gamera! You loser!
Sorry about that, guys. Gamera the Giant Monster is just sort of a slow kaiju movie. If you've watched it yourself, I think you'll know what I mean, but like the next installment in the series, a lot of this movie is about the humans devising a plan and learning about Gamera's abilities as the movie goes on. I like how Gamera is almost treated as a tragic character here. The reason why I say that Gamera is almost tragic here is that his connection to children, in this case, the specific kid, is Toshio Sakurai. He tells the adults that Gamera doesn't mean to cause destruction, or rather that he isn't evil. But Gamera, as a monster in this film, is really cool. I thought the effects were pretty impressive, and Gamera looks great. But overall, I'd say the film suffers a lot from a lot of poor pacing, and the human cast is just not very engaging. Most of the story is just chopped up to scientists acting on assumption, and then the assumption goes wrong, and they go back to square one, and just come up with a new kind of plan to thwart Gamera. And I think that's something a couple of the other movies in this franchise also suffer from. It's kind of cold in here. What movie are we reviewing? We're not doing this shit again. Versus Barugon is not one of my favorites, honestly, but luckily, I'd say that this is when the Gamera films I don't like end. I actually do really enjoy the story of this one for the most part, but weirdly, the human antagonist, who is a part of the main trio at the beginning of the film, ends up betraying his friends while leaving with what he thinks is a treasure in a large opal. This opal ends up being the egg for the first adversary of the Gamera series, in Barugon. Now, I explained the context of the human antagonist of this film because, to be honest, I don't think he got his comeuppance. Not only did he betray his two friends who saved his life minutes earlier by dragging him out of a swamp, he inadvertently killed one of them by not warning them about a venomous scorpion that was right on his leg. Then, this dude also ends up at the brother's house of one of his friends he tried to kill, and ends up indirectly killing both him and his wife due to Barugon being loose. So after all of this, you'd think there would be some serious payoff for all of the frankly evil, treacherous, heinous things that this guy has done throughout the entire course of this movie. Not only killing his friends and their family, but also unleashing Barugon on the world to kill countless other people. But no, all that really happens is that he gets comedically eaten by Barugon. And to me, for whatever reason, this really didn't sit well with me. This movie actually built up a really evil, maybe not compelling, but a vexing human antagonist, and nothing really ever comes of it. It left me feeling pretty frustrated with this movie. It also really didn't help that the actual fights between Barugon and Gamera felt really slow, especially when considering how much faster the later fights in the series feel in comparison to just even this one. But this film does have some great effects. The cinematography just really bumped up for this one compared to the first film, and also being in color is really nice. Other people seem to like this film a lot more than me, but I just can't get over this guy Onodera for being just the most evil human in the franchise.
Gamera! Gamera! 強いぞカメラ強いぞカメラ強いぞカメラ
Alright, fine. Close enough. Gamera vs. Guiron, to me, can be described as an unapologetically silly kaiju movie. It's probably the silliest in tone and in action of the whole franchise, yet you still have crazy stuff like Guiron making sushi out of space gauss, and the one alien lady literally atomizing her friend for being weak.
On our planet, useless members are supposed to die.
This is the second installment in the Japanese and White Boy trilogy, and I really like this movie. Like I said, during Barugon, all the movies following this I'd say I either love or really enjoyed. This movie really lets loose with the campiness of Gamera. The Protector of Children and Earth mantle of Gamera really takes on a whole different meaning here, as the entire movie takes place on another planet called Terra, which is like a super technologically advanced planet where water currents run the opposite way? Wait, how does that even work? And the aliens have teleportation devices where they can be led on silly little Scooby-Doo chases. For some reason, I always thought of Guiron as like a puppy-like kaiju, but in this movie, he's like mean. Like he's like a brutish bully, like guard dog, bully guy. He's mean. He's mean in this movie. Like he's a mean dude here. Like he literally decapitates and de-limbs Gauss in this movie. Like it's like brutal. But Guiron is such a cool monster, and I feel like it just goes to show how much fun Gamera's Rogues Gallery is outside of Virus. Sorry, Virus. This movie is just really charming, and there's not much else I can add other than that. It just rights the wrongs of Virus and gets the alien story right. I will not be saying Jiger's name throughout the rest of this segment of the video, and this is the only time you will hear it. Gamera got Jigered. This is the best and final installment of the Japanese and White Boy trilogy, and in my opinion, one of the best films in the franchise. The Gamera films have always had a thematic element of childlike wonder and hope that contrasts with adults' realistic, almost grim attitude, and I feel like this film really does the best at conveying that in a really beautiful way. We see that the greed of adults and humanity lay a curse on themselves by removing a statue that sealed away from wreaking havoc on Earth. I think this movie is an appropriate time to address it, but man, Gamera gets his butt kicked like all the time. Like, Gamera gets put on his back again, which also happened in Guiron, but I guess Gamera doesn't remember anything from that movie. And here he's just completely out of commission for a decent portion of the movie, allows to absolutely ravage Osaka. The second altercation between and Gamera was actually quite awesome, with Gamera nearly beating her, but then it happens. Gamera gets he gets. Now, I'm not trying to make light of this. It is really disturbing to watch Jiger impregnate Gamera by stabbing him with a needle, which creates a tumor on him, and that's sort of a big component of the Showa Gamera movies. Just some absurdly weird, completely random element that's just thrown in there for seemingly no reason. I really enjoy the group of kids this film focuses on. They're not annoying or like unrealistically stupid, but they're clever and actually keep the plot of the film rolling and actually figure out Jiger's weaknesses. Alright, finally we have the correct toys to accompany this segment of the video. They've really leveled up seemingly everything in this movie. This is the third film of the Showa era, and it really doesn't feel that way when watching it. I haven't touched a whole lot on the technical elements of this movie, mainly because for the most part they've just been okay or worse. But this movie is not in the same boat. The Gauss suit and the miniature props were incredible, and overall the cinematography of these Showa Gamera movies really continued to stun me. With these earlier films, the cinematography was the true highlight. Just a lot of great shots that give a lot of sense of scale, even for the time in which this was made. The actual choreography and the fights were like surprisingly thoroughly engaging. Genuinely amazing action. This movie just seriously does not feel like it was made in 1967, minus a couple of funny looking special effects. The final battle between Gauss and Gamera is genuinely epic and has some small setups and payoffs that work really well. But as I mentioned before, during Barugon, this movie does have its faults. The scientist plots, it just feels like they're always shoehorned in to explain the anatomy of a monster, despite basically none of the characters ever really interacting with the monster. We have an entire anatomical diagram for Gauss, only based on Eiichi's encounter with it, where he was stuck in the hand for most of the time, obviously not getting a clear visual of the whole creature. It just feels like they always know what to do despite very little practical hands-on experience with the monsters. And it's not like they assume that their plans or theories would work, but rather usually just state it like they're fact, which is what makes me kind of dread these scenes. But to this movie's credit, humanity's plan doesn't actually work initially, and they're forced to a last resort by calling on Gamera for help. Not much left to say other than this being a really charming, impressive, and I would almost say seemingly timeless kaiju movie. Now, the ordering of the rest of the franchise may be a bit controversial to some people, and that's okay, this is my list. But for me, this is just the film that is a smidge behind for me. This is a really strong start to the revival of the Gamera franchise. Between the release of this film and Gamera Super Monster, it spanned about 15 years, where Daiei would face many financial troubles that prevented them from making any more Gamera movies. It would be easier for me to say the negatives of this movie rather than the positives, so I'll start with that. I don't really have anything major negative to say. I would say that I just didn't find Fujitani's performance as Asagi as convincing. I feel like she doesn't show a lot of emotion in her performances. It feels kind of awkward at times. The cinematography, I feel, has always been a constant standout of the better entries in this franchise, and this movie certainly follows that trend. Just constantly jaw-dropping shots, the effects, the lighting, the camera work, just it's absolutely stunning. Other than the two shots of Gauss and Gamera flying directly up into the screen, which were kind of funny looking. The Gamera series has never really shied away from off-putting like horror, I guess. They just like putting freaky stuff in their movies, man. Like just think about, you know, just like they just do that. This was no different, and I did enjoy how they played around with that a bit with Gauss. I've also, for some reason, never really thought about this Gamera design as the revitalizer of the franchise, but when I think about it that way, I like this design even more than I did before, but this design is phenomenal. It just feels like it keeps a lot of the same vibes as the original Gamera design, while also turning it up a bit to match this very ferocious kind of evil, demon-like looking Gauss design. I like the story being pretty straightforward, and I like that the main human antagonists, if you want to call them that, are the members of the Cabinet. Felt pretty grounded and essentially paved the way for the staple dynamic of many modern kaiju movies. At least in a truly compelling way, that is. I don't think there was anything groundbreaking, but the story did sort of leave me itching for a bit more from the main cast. I thought there were moments to add some dimension, but that's really grasping at straws to ask this movie to be even better. I think a good description for this movie is that it feels like for the relatively low or average standards of a kaiju flick, this does deliver on every crucial front. I enjoyed it. This is a movie that I feel gets completely flown under the radar by most kaiju fans. The Heisei trilogy is typically the ones that get the most praise out of this franchise, but I think Gamera the Brave deserves that same kind of praise, if not more in my opinion. Not that I would consider this movie to be really all that much better than those of the main trilogy, but this movie is phenomenal. It takes such a fun, lighthearted, small-town approach to a kaiju movie that really isn't seen anywhere else in the genre. The main setting of this movie is a seaside town where the main kid, Toru, goes on a field trip and finds a cute little turtle with a pretty red rock, who Toru calls Toto after the nickname his mom used to call him, who we know has passed away. Over the course of the film, Toto grows unnaturally quick and large, and Toru has to hide him away from the adults, and only his friends can be trusted with the knowledge of how special Toto is. It's a movie that follows the really simple yet lighthearted and hopeful nature of the much earlier Showa Gamera movies in a reinvented way. The story is sort of silly, but it's still engaging and well-paced, and the dynamic between Toru and his father really shines as his father tries to be a voice of logic and reason in the midst of the fantastical connection Toru has to Gamera, which he just can't shake or ignore. And it's kind of beautiful how his father has to come to trust his son that this monster, Toto, needs the help of these children to overcome the film's big bad monster, Zetus. Zetus is a cool aspect of this movie, but he is definitely the weakest link. He doesn't really have an origin at all, and he doesn't exactly have a motive other than we know he's evil. Oh my goodness, is he eating them? Zetus as a monster, a lot of people would probably cite as kind of generic looking, which I would deny. I think Zetus is super cool, but a lot of people probably wouldn't care so much about him. But I don't mind that they don't spend too much time on him at all, and that there is no real subplot to the movie besides Toru's connection to Toto. It makes the story feel all the more personal. Also, his suit gets blown up to smithereens. But the only gripe I have with this movie is that I wish that the scenery was just a little more diverse. 99% of this movie takes place during broad daylight, and I wish there would have been a scene or two that takes place during the night, or, sunset, or, whatever. Like, Zetus' first attack being at night would have really added a splash of scenery and would have fit really well. This is one of the Gamera movies that I grew up with, which may be why I think of it so highly, but bias aside, I love this movie, and you should too. Throughout this trilogy, I really wanted a consistent and personable thematic element, as the first two movies didn't really have that much, and this movie really fulfilled on that front in every way. It most certainly feels like this hits the nail on the head of what I felt was missing from the previous installments in this trilogy. I love the writing of Revenge of Iris, how the movie does initially understand that, well, yeah, Gamera might kill a few people here and there accidentally, but he's still doing good for humanity, as we're introduced to Ayana's main motive, her hatred of Gamera for killing her parents and Kat. So the initial reaction from a viewer is that of hesitation. Like, yeah, I mean, I get it, but you can obviously see the good Gamera has done for the survival of both the world, humanity, and Japan. But then the movie reminds us of something that wasn't entirely consequential in the previous installment: Gamera severing his connection from humanity in Asagi. And to touch on this, I think the change in Gamera's design does great to reflect this. The much leaner, edgier, meaner design really does give off the vibe that Gamera just doesn't really mess with humans like that anymore. For some reason in this movie, this design sort of exudes a sense of scale that the other two don't. Does anyone else get that feeling? But back to this, the reason I say we're inadvertently reminded of this is because of the nature of Gamera's first appearance in this movie in Shibuya, which is just him destroying everything. It's to the point where Gamera would have probably been better off letting the much smaller Gauss do whatever they wanted for a bit and rather waiting for them to leave the populated areas before disposing of them. Gamera kills 20,000 people. I think these shifts in narrative and perspective aren't spontaneous, and it is truly convincing, and although you may not fully buy it to the extent of Ayana, who completely just hates Gamera, it's enough to make you question him a bit, like, dude, you couldn't kill, like, 10,000 less people. Unfortunately, I feel like the actual monster content here is probably the weakest of the whole trilogy. I still may like it more than Guardian of the Universe, but I definitely felt like Legion was the peak, which obviously spoils my #1 spot, but you probably knew that already. I really love the final battle and the scene of Iris just slowly marching through Kyoto, but there is a part of me feeling that there was something missing. It is terribly difficult to know which one I prefer, but I think that'll come with multiple rewatches. Now that we are finally at the top spot, who else could it be other than Gamera to Attack of Legion? Mother Legion is definitely the standout here. It really is the only Gamera monster that feels truly alien. I like how Gauss was alien in nature in that it was created to essentially be the most perfect evil creature, but Legion differs in that every aspect of its design is alien. A beyond unorthodox body configuration, the electromagnetic communication aspect, the bug-like features like the legs, the ability to essentially stand despite being quadruped. I've always liked Legion, but this movie really throws her at you with no real explanation, and I think that made it way cooler to me. And I feel like the consistently great cinematography really sells you on the scale of Legion in moments, especially compared to that of Gauss in the previous installment where he was actually smaller than Gamera for the most part. Shinji Higuchi really just outdoes himself here. The effects are just absolutely incredible. Outside of the first time where CGI was used to depict the swarm attacking Gamera, the effects are just absolutely top-notch and most certainly hold up. The fights are just so insane, so destructive, and very well choreographed considering how complex of a design Legion is. It never really feels overly bulky or slow. I do like that this movie is so fast-paced and only concerned with the human characters being vessels to peddle the monsters. It feels like the cast of this movie acts as humankind as divisions, where there's typically the main group or surrounding characters who are willing to trust Gamera and support him, where they're typically the ones extrapolating the details on the monster and finding the ways to defeat them. And another sect of people, typically military or higher up officials, who are much less trusting of Gamera as an ally and are typically much more of the actors rather than the minds. So it can feel like the characters are somewhat cogs in a machine, but that's really only because the movie moves so fast that the only small moments of characterization we get are like the scene where Honami invites her crew to her home inside of a convenience store to study the Legion. They are just so fast and action-packed that there's no reason to complain about Kaneko keeping the movie as lean and as cut as possible. One last small qualm I have that I just didn't feel like the score here was as prominent or as iconic as the first installment, or even Iris. It was almost as if I was waiting for the moment for the score to really overtake a scene, and it just never really happened, and I was like, oh, the movie's over. But other than that small revelation after the fact, thoroughly enjoyed this one again. Everything you'd really ever want out of a monster movie. Could not praise this one more. And that's it. That's every Gamera movie ranked from worst to best. Do you agree with my list? What's your #1? What's your #1 favorite Gamera movie? Is it Legion? Is it Iris? Is it Guardian of the Universe? Is it Gamera the Brave? Is it Super Monster? Let me know. Let me know how passionate you are about the Gamera franchise, how passionate you are about these monsters. Just let me know the filmmaking. Anything you can let me know in the comments down below. Put it down there because I want to know. I'm gonna read those and I'm gonna think about them. So comment down below. I'll see you at G-Fest in the coming weeks. This has been Epic Toxie. Goodbye.